Hey friends, welcome to our ReactJS Fundamental series. In this video, we are going to talk about React lifecycle methods, and it's a very important concept if you are going to work for a little bit of older project, right? So definitely you're going to encounter a lot of class-based component, and if I'm talking about class-based component, means you are going to deal with state of the component, right? And to handle and maintain the state of a component, then you need to know everything about the lifecycle method of a component, right? Now you may heard about React hooks, and with React hooks also you can have the state and you don't need lifecycle method. That's completely true, right? So if in 2021, if you're going to chance if you're getting a chance to implement a feature, then definitely it's okay to use a functional component and use state and use effect to have the state, and you can update the state, right? But if you're going to work in an existing project, right, then definitely you're going to encounter a lot of class-based component, right? And then it's totally a stupid idea to change the existing component with a functional component, right? Component may have a lot of codes, it has different logic, right? So you don't need to change the component, right? React lifecycle is always the part of the React, right? It is always React and it will be always in the React. It is never going away from the React. So you need to know and learn about the React lifecycle methods. That's for sure. That's one thing. If you're going to work for a legacy project, then you have to deal with the class-based components, and then you have to know everything about the lifecycle methods. And second thing, if you're going for a React interview, if you're going for a front-end interview, then interviewer will definitely ask you question about like explain lifecycle method, explain different phases of component lifecycle, explain every details of every methods in the lifecycle, right? And then you have to explain, right? So there is no question to skip this thing, and it is very important. You'll get a lot of benefit from it. Okay, so let's see from the official documentation of React, right? So you can understand this with a simple and beautiful diagram. You can see it has a link over here. You can just click on and open this link in a new tab, and you can see this is the diagram. You can also select the version. So right now this is 16.4, and it is also same for this 17.0.1, so you don't need to worry about that. Okay, so this is the diagram of three phases of the component life cycle, and let's open this diagram in our drawing tool so I can explain you in a better way, right? So here the first phase is, you can see that that's a mounting phase, right? So within the mounting phase, this is the first phase, the component initialized phase, right? And within the initialization, constructor will be called. So this is a normal behavior. So if you create a normal class in JavaScript, then that time also the constructor will be called. That's completely normal thing. And after the constructor, a method get drive state from props, that's from the life cycle, so this will be called. And after that, a method render will be called, right? Let me add a letter M. This is a mounting phase, and then this is the mounting phase. In mounting phase, this get drive state from props will be called, and again in the mounting phase, render method will be called. And after that it will like and after that component did mount will be called, right? So this is all in the mounting phase. And if there is a change in state or props of the component, then updating phase will be triggered. As the component is a class-based component, right, and it is already instantiated, so constructor will not be called, but what will be called, that's a get drive state from props. Okay, so get drive state from props will be called, and that's a part of the updating phase. So you can see the get drive state from props is common in both mounting and updating phase. After that, should component update will be called, and then after a render method will be called, right? And after that, get a snapshot before update, and then finally component did update will be called, right? So this is completely updating phase, and we are going to see all the examples, so you just be patient, right? Then the third phase and the final phase is unmounting phase. So it is like you're removing the component from some parent or some higher order component, right? So unmounting phase, only one method will be called, that's a component will unmount, right? Unmounting phase. Now let's see everything with an example, so we can we are never going to forget this. Okay, so let me open a basic React project. So this is our basic React project and I'm using code sandbox. You can also use code sandbox for practice. Okay, now let me remove, this is a functional component, right? So I'm going to add a new component, a class-based component, right? So there only we can get the advantage of lifecycle methods. With the functional component, we don't need the lifecycle. There is something different, that's a React hooks. With the help of React hooks, we can have the state. Okay, so if you just see, okay, so let's write our now we are going to write our first component, right? So we'll say import React from React library, and we'll use a class-based component class app extends, and we will use a component class from the React library, and you can see it's imported automatically. That's a component class. Now this component class is going to provide all the lifecycle method, right? And you have to call one method for sure, that's a render. You can skip other methods like you can skip get driver state from props, you can skip component did mount, but render definitely you need to call. That's kind, you have to override, otherwise you're going to get error. So here we'll say render, and within the render we are going to return JSX code. And within this we're going to say app component, right? And we are going to export this, export default app, save this, and you can see we are getting text over here, app component, right? Now let me write everything in a proper order, right? The first method will be called, that's because of the class, that's not actually the part of the lifecycle. Constructor will be called for every class, right? So constructor, then after constructor get drive state will be called, and that's a static method, static get derived state, sorry, from props. Then after render method will be called, right? And after the render component did mount, component did mount will be called, right? So I think most of us already know about component did mount, like this is common. If you want to make some API call, then definitely we are going to use component did mount lifecycle method, because this is the method which will be triggered after the render, and you can make some call. Once you have the data, then you can update the component, right? So the component did mount will be called, and this is all a mounting phase, right? This is all mounting phase. Now we are going to see the use case of get drive state from props. First of all, this is a rarely used method, but it has a use case, and I'm going to show you how we can use this get drive state from props. Okay, so now let's create one more component, and here we're going to create a component, let's say validate number. Okay, so this is our component validate number.js, and let's copy everything from app.js, put over here. So this is our validate number component, right? And here we'll say we are going to have some input box, right? We are going to validate a number. So here we'll say input type equals to self-closing tag, and then type is going to be
text, and we will have on change, and we'll have some methods distributed like that, only like a value. We'll have some value. Oh, sorry, that's app, right? That's wrong. Yeah, that's validate number. Yeah, first let's change the component name first. Validate number, and let's copy over here. And here we will pass some methods. We are getting some methods from the props. So say, just come over here, destructure your props, const this dot props, and here we will say on change, and we'll pass over here on change. Then we are going to get value. Okay, cool. And also we are going to have a button after the input. So we'll say button, close this button, and here we will say validate number, and within the button we will have an on click. Okay, so here we'll say props. So we are going to get a method from the props validate number, and here we'll pass that validate number. Okay, so we're getting from the props itself.
Validate number. Now let's save this. And now let's import this component validate number to our app.js component. Okay, so here we are going to import. So let's go down, and here we're going to say validate number, right? So you can see it's imported from here. Save this, so auto formatting will be done. Now we have app component, and then after we have a validate number. Because of that, we have an input box and a text box, a button, right? Then we are going to have a BR tag. Okay, so yes, BR tag, and after the input we will show a message like number is valid or not. It's a valid number or some string is there, so we're going to show that error as well, and that error also we are going to get from the props. Okay, so we'll see error. Save this, and now let's pass everything to our component. The required things are, first thing is the value is required, so we are going to have a value from the so now it's time to call the constructor, right? We want to initialize some state, so we'll use constructor with the props, and then we'll initialize our parent constructor with super keyword props with the existing props, and then we'll use this dot state equals to, here first we'll write a number right within a string, and then after we are going to write error, that is again an empty string, and here we are going to pass the value. It's going to be number and error. Okay, let's again use the destructuring to get the number from the state. Say const this dot state. Yeah, it's taking time, but it is useful, right? You'll get to know something very important. Okay, and here we can say the number, and then finally error, right? So number and error we are passing over here, and then we also need to pass on change. Here we are going to get an event this dot set state to set the state value, right? We are going to set the state value, say number colon event dot target dot value. So now we have binded our input with the state, right? So we can manipulate or input something, right? So on change event and something like that. Next we are going to have what else we have? Validate number. Yeah, error we already have on click, right? So we are going to validate, finally we are going to validate the number. So we'll say on click equals to let's say this dot validate number. Let's make this small v. Let's copy this, save, and let's write a new function to validate the number, right? So we'll say validate number, and this is going to be an arrow function, right? And here we'll see const this dot state. Now we are going to destructuring the state. We are getting number over here, right? Now we'll validate this number. If is nan, if not a number, if that's a true, then we'll empty that. We will remove the error. We'll hide the error. Okay. So here we'll say this dot set state, and here we're going to say number. Sorry, error. So if that's a valid number, then we'll hide the error, we'll remove the error, right? And if that's not a valid number, then we'll add the error. Set state error, here we'll say invalid number, right? This is our goal. So we can enter some numbers, and we can validate the number if that's a valid number or not. If that's a valid number, then we'll show the will not show the error. If that's not a valid number, then we'll show the error, right? So this is our overall code. Now let's add something. So let's say 1 2 3 4 and validate number, no error, right? Now let's add something with some random, right? So this is not a number. Now validate number, and this is not working. So here we have a little mistake. It's ERORR, and we have written ERROR. So that's wrong. RROR. Now it's fine. So now let's save and validate the thing. So here we'll say validate number, that's not a problem. Now let's enter something and also remove this. We want to hide if number is valid, so we will not show any error. Now let's add some number and validate number. It's totally fine, right? Now let's add a number with some random text. That's not a valid number. You can see validate number, and still we are not getting anything. Oh, sorry, the method name over here is onClick. My mistake. So onClick is going to be the method name, and we'll paste over here onClick. Now save this and let's go back to the app.js and let's verify it. Validate number, this looks fine. Now let's add some number, fine. Right now let's add something wrong. So this is not a number, right? Clear the console, validate number, and you can see we have got a message invalid number. That's because this is not a valid number. We have a checked condition, and based on that, if that's a not valid number, we are setting this error invalid number, right? So what is happening over here? Till now everything is fine, right? We have used the render lifecycle method and we are displaying that. Now let's open our paint and let's see this thing with diagram, right? We'll understand this thing with diagram. So here what is going to happen here, right now you have something within the state. You have number within the state and you have error within the state. Both are empty string, and you are assigning the number, and you, based on the number correct value, we are assigning the error, we are showing the error, right? And on click of the button, we have validate button. On click of this button, we are showing the output like invalid number or nothing, right? If number is valid, then we are going to show nothing, right? So here we are displaying based on click, right? So this is the situation. We have something within the state, we are entering, and then we are clicking on the validate button. Now let's imagine we have scenario like we are making some API call, right? We're making some API call and we are getting a number that we need to validate, right? We're getting response, a number. We're getting response from the API, a number. And let's imagine that's not a valid number. Okay, this number is not a valid number, and we are displaying this number within the input box. Okay, whatever the number, let's say 123F, right? So we are displaying 123F. That's coming from the response, right? We're displaying over here. And what happened? So here the number is not a valid, and we are waiting for the user. If user will click on this validate button, then we'll show invalid number. So that's not right? That's completely wrong. So what we can do, when we are getting the response from the API, we are getting the value, then after we will check immediately the input value, and before clicking on the validate button, we will show output invalid number, right? Because that's not user entered number, that's the number from the response. Okay, now let's try to achieve the same example with the get drive straight from props. Okay, so here, so let's go back to our code, and here we'll write, so this is our component, this is a validate number component, and now we are going to use our lifecycle method get drive straight from props. That's in a static method, say get drive straight from props, and it takes two arguments, a previous props and state, right? Or like, so you can see the name itself, like get drive is straight from props, right? It takes the props and then state, and here we can get the current props value, right? So here we'll use the same logic, and here from this get drive straight from props, we have to return an object, right? We have to return the state object. So whatever this current state will return a new state, right? So again we have to create a state over here with the help of a constructor that we're going to say props, and here we'll say super props this dot state, and here we're going to say error, and it will show nothing, right? So this dot state equals to empty, and okay, that's constructor. Okay, constructor, and now error gone. Okay, so here we have our state. So instead of displaying our props error, here we are displaying our props error. So we are not going to display the props error. Now we are going to display the error will not use this error. We'll display the error from the state. Okay, we'll say const and we'll get error from the state, this dot state, and here we are going to show a state, right? Till now everything is fine as it is. Now within this get derived state from props, here we'll see if, or we can directly return an object. We'll validate first the number is an n. So the current props we are getting from, that's these are, right? We are getting on change value and on click. So we are getting a value. Value is nothing but it's a number. So I will pass the value, right? And if that's a valid number, then we are going to return an object with an empty error message, right? And if that's not a valid number, then we are going to return an object with error. Okay, so if that's valid, then here we'll say error empty, and if that's not a valid, then we'll return state with error message like invalid number. Or save this. Okay, so from this method you have to return an object, right? So this is going to be attached with the existing state, right? Or even you can add a new state property within this object. So here it is, props.value. Okay, so props.value, and this is fine. So now this is fine, right? Now as I said, we are going to get, we are going to make an API call, and then we are going to get the response. Let's have something within the state that's not a valid number. Okay, so we'll say 123 GHJ. That's not a valid number, and you can see without clicking on the validate number button, we have got an error immediately, right? So this is the beauty of get derived state from props. Let's reload this, and you can see my cursor over here, and that's just API call. That's just like an example of API call. We are making the API call, we're getting an invalid number. So number is invalid, that's why we're getting the error, because we are mutating the state, we are updating the state before rendering. Here you can see the validate number, we're using this method, right? And we are updating the state even before rendering. Now you can also see from the image, the get derived state from props, this method is getting called before the render, right? So render is calling after the get derived state from props. So here you have a chance to update the state of your component, right? Of your class-based component. So this is the example of get derived state from props, right? Now we know how get derived state from props will be called and when it will be called. So we have a chance to update the state even before rendering the component, right? So we know how this get derived state from props work, and we can update the state even before rendering the component, right? So first the get derived state from props will be called, then after render method will be called, and render method will be responsible for rendering the component, right? And after the render method, component did mount will be called. So order will be like first component did get derived state from props will be called, second render method, and third component did mount will be called, right? And component did mount will be called only once. It is not only once in the mounting phase. So here what we can do, let me show you when it will be called and what will be the order, right? So this is the place where we can call the component did mount. You can write anywhere, but the order will be always same, right? So component did mount, and here we are going to write a console.log, so we can see when it is going to be called. And here we can write component did mount. Okay, component did mount, and it is calling from the app component, right? Let's save this and let's clear the console, and also let's have a console.log within the render so we can see what will be calling first. Okay, so here we'll write render :app, save, and also we have a constructor. So here we're going to write, it is not required, the constructor will be called first, that's for sure, right? So here we are using two methods of mounting phase, that's a render and component did mount. Okay, so component did mount method will be responsible for calling APIs, and with the response we can update the state of the component. Let's reload our component and you can see what is going to happen. So the render method gets called, and then after component did mount of app component is called, right? Now we are going to understand the updating phase, right? So here you can see, here we have updating phase, right? Within the updating phase, get drive straight from props will be called. So this is a common between mounting and updating phase, and you can use in the same way like we have used in the mounting phase. Then after should component update will be called. So we are going to create a component and we'll see with an example. Okay, so let's open our code, and here we are going to create a new component, that's a children component. So we'll create component children.js.
Okay, let's write the code, component code. It is going to be import React from React, and then we're going to write a class that's going to be children component extends component. Right, now we have imported the component, but we have to expose this component as a default export, and then we're going to say children component, right? So for every component, the render method is kind of mandatory, that needs to be override every time, otherwise you're going to get some error. So here we are going to return this some JSX code. Here we'll say div. Now within this div, we're going to write some props, right? This dot props dot label. This is the name of the component, the children component name, right? Also we're going to write a console so we can see when it is going to be called. Okay, so we'll say a render method
of children. Save this. Now let's go to our app.js and let's write our children component over here. So we'll say children component, right? Let's save this and let's reload the application and see the proper order when component did mount will be called and when the children component will be called, right? So here we are saying the render method of app component gets called, then after render method of children component gets called. So if you see the render function, this is the function, right? And this is called, right? And within this we are returning a JSX code, and within the JSX code we have children component. So the important thing that needs to be noted, when this children component is getting rendered, all the lifecycle methods of this children component will be called, then it will come back and then it will execute the component did mount, right? And you can also see the render method of children component already executed, then after component did mount of app method will be called, right? So whatever the nesting level you have, that will be finished first, then it will come back to the parent component and execute the pending methods. Okay, so here is the example, and the use case we are going to see the use case of, we have already seen the use case of get drive straight from props. Now we are going to see the use case of should component update. Okay, now let's go back to our children component and let's see this is the render app and render children. Now we are going to update the state, right? Let's change something, and you see the state updated, right? Whenever we are changing the text code, the state of the app component is getting updated, and because of that render method called, the app component render method calls, then after render method of children component gets called, right? So there is no change in the children component, right? There is no props change, no state change, but still the children component is getting rendered, and it will be a big problem, a huge problem for the in terms of performance, right? Let's say you have a huge component, huge children component with lots of state and props, and there is no change, but still you are rendering it. And again I want to show you, let me hide let me change some text of the input, and you can see, and you see the render method of app method as well as the render method of children gets called. So we don't need to render the children, right? There is no change in the children component. So here we can use our method should component update, right? So should component update returns a boolean value, and that boolean value decides whether the component needs to be rendered or not. So if the default value is true of should component update, so if default value is true, means it will always render, right? And we can make it false based on the props. So we'll say should component update, and here we're going to get previous props and previous state, right? And by default value is returned true. So you can see the default is like that only. The render children component render method is getting called. Now we're going to have some code. If we'll say previous props dot, so we are using some label over here, right? We have some label and that needs to be rendered, right? So we'll say previous props dot label not equals to current props, right? So current props is this dot props dot label. If that's not equal, then we are going to return true, else we are going to return false. Okay, save this code and let's clear your console. Okay, now let's reload. This is the mounting phase going to happen, right? So this is a mounting phase. Render method of app component gets called, then render method of children components gets called, and then component did mount of app component, right? Now let's change the state, and here we're going to change the input value that's responsible for the state change. So here we're going to change it, and you can see only the render method of app component gets called. There is no rendering of children components, and because of this you can have a huge performance improvement. And if you explain this thing to the interviewer, he'll be definitely impressed, right? So this is how should component work. And then after what we have, so after the should component update, the as usual render method will be called. So here you can see the small arrow. You can notice over here there is something like, you can see this is and with a cross mark. So what happens here, if I'm returning true, then it will go to the render method and render the component. But if I'm saying false, in this case we are saying false, right? So here it will just stop. It will abort the execution of the next lifecycle method called. Okay, so it will not execute. But if it is true, then it will execute the render method, and then after it will execute the Git Snapshot before update, and then after component did update will be called. So let me show you the use case of Git Snapshot before update. So this is the method which will be called after the render, and what you can have with this Git Snapshot before update. Let's write over here. Now we are going to write Git Snapshot before update, and it accepts two parameters, that's previous props and previous state, right? And you can also see the article, and this Git Snapshot before update will always work together with component did update. Okay, so we'll write component did update, and we'll write some console.log, and then here we'll say component did update with children. Okay, and within this component Git Snapshot before update also will write console.log, and here we are going to say Git Snapshot before update. Okay, and children, right? So these two method works as a pair, and this Git Snapshot before update has to return something, and so either it will be null or it will be some object, but it has to return something, otherwise it is not going to work. So here we'll say return null, and you can see the error will be gone, right? Save, let's reload, and this is mounting phase, right? So these two methods are the part of the updating phase, so we have to update the state, right? So let's update it, and you can see the render method of children component gets called, as well as Git Snapshot before updates called just after the render. And if you hover this method, you can see some description about it. What it says, runs before React. So here you can see the description of this method is runs before React applies the result of render to the document. So here the document means it's a DOM tree, it's a HTML document, right? So this method will run before React applies the result of render method. So when the render method will execute, it will give some result, right? Because of the render will have some result, and this result will be applied over the DOM tree, over the HTML document, right? So just after the render and before applying on the document, this Git Snapshot will be executed, right? So in between the render method and applying over the document, in between this Git Snapshot before update will execute, right? And you can the benefit of it, right? You can have the previous props and previous state, and you can again change, and you can add some additional values and return as an object. So here you can see instead of null, I will say what I can say, let's have something, let's say name, and we'll say res. Save this, and here in this component did update also we can get the previous props, previous state, and then snapshot, right? So we'll say snapshot. So what we will get in the snapshot, we'll get this object, whatever we are returning, name res, we'll get this in this snapshot. And here's, you can see, if I will do console.log, we'll say snapshot right? Now the previous prop and previous state is going to be the same, whatever the previous props and state, but a snapshot you're going to see the name res, right? So let's reload this. And this is the mounting phase, render method of app, render method of children, and then finally component did mount gets called, right? Now let's change the state and force the component to re-render, right? So it will be like updating phase. Here we'll say, we'll remove J, and you can see this is the re-rendering, that's an updating phase. Again, the render method called, the render method of children component that gets called, and then get a snapshot before update and children gets called. And then after component did update called, and you can see we have logged something name res. So this is, we are passing from the get snapshot before update, and we are getting within the component did update. So it is going to be useful in different scenarios, and you're going to learn all these things in my future projects. Okay, so this is all updating phase. Again, you can have the component did mount in this children component, but there is no need to write, right? You know it. Now the next and the final phase is unmounting phase, right? So in the unmounting phase, the only one method component will unmount will be called. Okay, let me show you what is the use case of it as well. Okay, so here let's have a digital clock, right? Let's create a digital clock. Let's create a component as clock.
Digital clock.js. Okay, and again we're going to write our comment and go React from React and class digital clock, and let's extend the component. Sorry. And here we're going to have a render method like always, and we're going to return some JSX code. And here we'll say digital clock. Okay, save this, and let's import this digital clock in our app component. Okay, so after the children, we're going to import the digital. Oh, we have to export this as well.
So we'll say export default digital clock. Now let's save this. Let's go back to the app.js. We'll say digital clock, right? And you can see we have got a text digital clock, right? And we'll have some state over here like a show clock, and it is going to have some true value. Okay, and we will render this digital clock based on the boolean value. Okay, so we'll say show clock, and then we are going to have the digital clock. Save this, and you can see the expected result over here. This show clock is needs to be from the state, right? So we'll say show clock, save this, and you can see we are getting the digital clock, right? Now let's create a digital clock. So here also we are going to have a constructor props. We'll initialize the parent component constructor. So we'll say props, and here we'll say this dot state, and here we are going to say the clock or time. Say the clock time, and we'll say new date to locale string. Okay, and here we are going to show our digital clock. So here we'll say this dot state dot digital clock time. Okay, so you can see this is right now is static, right? So we are getting some time 11 o'clock 19 minutes and 40 seconds. If you reload this, then you're going to see some change in time. That's 51 seconds, right? So it was 40, now it is 50. So every time you'll reload, you're going to see some change in the seconds value. Okay, so we are going to have, you are going to use some set interval function to update the clock value. Okay, so for that, let's first create a variable so we can have our timer, right? Say this dot, or let's have something like let's say the timer. This is our function, timer function, and here we're going to call set interval, and here we are going to write a callback function, and this function will be called in every 1 second. Okay, and we'll update our state. So we'll say this dot set state, and here we're going to say the clock time, a new state dot to locale string, right? And this timer needs to be called, right? So we'll call this timer from the component did mount, because the component did mount will be called only once, right? And it will be called after the render. So when the render will be called, we'll have our time, right? Because of this, we have already initialized some initial value of the timer, right? And then render will be called, so we can see the timer value. Once the render completed, then component did mount will be executed, and then we'll call our timer function. Component did mount will be called once, and then it will call the timer function, and timer function will execute our set interval, and it will be set interval will be called in every 1 second. Okay, so here we'll say component did mount, and here we'll call our this dot timer function. Okay, and you can see we are having some change in clock, right? So you can see the 46, 47, the time is changing. Now this is a perfect digital clock. This is working perfectly. Now, what is the problem with this? Let me show you. This is fine, right? Now let's go to the app.js, and we are going to have a button again. And we'll say remove clock, and we'll add a on-click handler. Let's minimize this code. On-click, and here we're going to say we are going to write a function, and we will remove the timer. How we can remove the timer? Simply we'll make the show clock false, right? So we'll say this dot set state, and here we're going to say show clock, and this is going to be false. Okay, let's save this. So if I will click on this remove clock, then timer will be removed, but you're going to see a very famous and common error, and it is kind of very important for the interview also, right? Interviewer may ask you this question, and you're going to see the question, right? So let me clear the console. Now I'm going to click on this remove clock, and you're going to see what is going to happen. Let's click on this remove clock, and you can see you have got an error, right? The error is can't perform a React state update on an unmounted component, right? So we have when we have clicked on this remove clock, the show clock value becomes false, and the component gets removed, component gets unmounted. Okay, this is a no op, but it indicates a memory leak in your application. So this is an issue of memory leak. So interviewer may ask you the question about what is the memory leak and how can you avoid the memory leak. So here you can see we are executing a timer function. Within the timer function, we are writing the set interval, and this set interval is keep on calling even if you have removed the component, right? So this is like attached with a component, and even if you have removed, but the timer is keep on running, the function is there, right? So you have to remove, you have to clear the timer interval, right? So how can we do that? How can we avoid the memory leak problem? We'll use the component will unmount. First of all, we have to write a variable to store the timer. So I'll say this dot timer timer interval. Okay, and here we'll say null, and when this timer function will be called, we'll initialize that this dot timer interval. Okay, now set interval, right? Now we are going to use our component will unmount. So when we are going to remove that component, we will remove the timer also, right? We will remove the set interval function. So we'll say component will unmount, right? This is the final unmounting method, and here we'll say clear interval, and we'll pass our function our variable this is our timer interval, right? Save this. Now let's reload the application. So this is our digital clock component, right? And this is working fine. Now we are going to remove our digital clock, and you are not going to see any issue of memory leak. Okay, now see, remove clock, and totally fine. The timer, the component removed, and with the component timer also removed. There is no background function running. There is no function set timer running in the background, so there is no problem of memory leak, right? So this is working absolutely fine, and this was the last and final phase of the component lifecycle methods. Okay, so this was the unmounting phase. And apart from mounting, updating, and unmounting, there will be some few things you may encounter within a project, that's like deprecated methods. So within the mounting phase, you can see there is a method named component will mount. So this is a deprecated method. If you encounter this method, or if you want to avoid or skip, like don't want to work, then you can simply prefix this component will mount method with unsafe underscore. So this will be safe, and it will be, you'll not get any warning like this method gets deprecated, you have to remove it. So you can simply use any deprecated method by using unsafe underscore key. Okay, so we have seen updating phase, we have seen unmounting phase. Apart from that, we also have a phase that's error handling phase. Within this phase, we have two different methods: get drive state from error and component did catch. So this is kind of not very important, but this is the part of error handling, and we are going to see this error handling in upcoming videos, in our future videos. Hopefully you have got some idea how the component lifecycle works, how the methods will be called, what will be the correct order. Now you can answer everything very easily and clearly. So guys, thank you for watching, and please do share, like, and subscribe this video. Have a nice day. Bye bye.